Hello, everyone. I'm here with Matt and Dan, who have just made a drama about a dramatic topic, and that is the character of Dick Turpin. Now, Dick Turpin will be very familiar to anyone from Britain, but a lot of our foreign viewers, which is actually most of us, most of you, won't perhaps know who he was. So, Matt, Darren, who was Dick Turpin?
Well, Dick Turpin originally was a young man from Essex who was an apprentice butcher.
I think most men are originally young, aren't they? Isn't that how most of us start?
Yes, but he became very famous. The short version is he became the UK's most famous highway robbery man. Famous in the 80s for those of us that remember for the Adamant song, Stand and Deliver, for example.
Ike Diddley Qua Qua.
Don't get Darren started, he knows the words. He was very, very famous in the UK, still is to certain generations, but we noticed that even though we keep making stories of Robin Hood and Sherlock Holmes, that this and Doctor Who, that this very famous British cultural character had kind of fallen by the wayside, and we thought we'd go and re-explore him from a modern lens.
Yeah. Oh, a modern lens. What is a modern lens? Why do we need a modern lens to look at Dick Turpin?
Well, if you look at the top 10 television programs of the last 10, 20 years, often they're voted as being The Sopranos, The Wire, Peaky Blinders, stories about anti-heroes, so stories about criminals, but getting more of an insight into their lives. And that's really the approach we wanted. It's like, okay, what if we follow Dick Turpin's life as a criminal? We don't try to gloss him up. He did very bad things. But normally he's portrayed more as Robin Hood. Darren, you can speak to the history of that.
Yeah, so there's this sort of romanticized image of Turpin, of the sort of gentleman highwayman, as there are for lots of highwaymen. But obviously he's the most famous. And that all really comes from that Victorian period when they romanticized highwaymen after the highwayman period. And this is when, as Matt said, Ainsworth wrote the book Rookwood, which has Turpin in it as a character, and in it he is this dashing sort of hero, really. And we wanted to address that in the same way that, you know, people romanticize things like the Krays and other villains in the past. We wanted to look at why, you know, sort of to an extent why that is, but also the true story of Turpin. His actual time as a highwayman was a very small part of that, you know, and there was a lot more going on in the world at that time. You know, we're talking about 1720 to 1735 to 1740. So it's a very interesting period, and we thought, you know, that sort of deserved a bit of attention, really.
Okay, so most of the films and television series about Dick Turpin in the past have been based on the romanticized image. So you've got a guy usually with a big black cloak, and he's got the cocked hat, the tricorn, and he's galloping along in a mask, and he holds up very rich people, some of whom are swooning ladies who perhaps were even hoping to be held up by a highwayman, because highwaymen are so dashing. And then he swoops off into the night and has romantic affairs in various inns around the country. But he was just a wrong 'un, wasn't he? I mean, he was a crook. He went around with a gang of outlaws, and he threatened people with deadly weapons.
What surprised me when I first mentioned it to Darren, so I'm sat here today on the Cambridge Road to London, up in North Essex, where he's from. So I grew up with all of the tales of him around here. But what surprised me when I mentioned it to Darren was the story of him as a young man. He was like, well, he didn't really mean to become a criminal. In them days, what turned out was he was a terrible butcher's apprentice. Ended up with, I think he had at least 3, is what we could find in the historical records, butcher shops that kept on going bust. Seemed to be paid for by his wife's dad. And the final one he had, I think, was the one in Thaxted in Essex. And he then had the bright idea that he didn't need to pay the farmers for meat if he could go poaching it at night. And of course, in those days, poaching, especially cows, a very expensive asset, was instantly a capital offence. So what we might now see as a minor misdemeanor to a degree, poaching to then sell it in your butcher shop because you're a terrible butcher that keeps going bankrupt, instantly doomed himself to the gallows from the age of about 21. So he was on the run from then. And everything else we know about him that we know he did comes from this original sin, if you like, of he was just a bit crap at running a butcher shop.
Well, hang on, though. He would have known that it was a serious offence to steal a cow, and he would have known that a cow was a major asset, and he would have known that he would have been harming the owner of that cow. I can't see that his position is defensible simply on the grounds that he was a bit rubbish at business.
Yeah, no, I think when we started, and the book we both used as a main reference to start with is a book called Immortal Turpin, which is a brilliant book. And that just tells the facts of his life. And the thing is with that book, when you start to read it, you realize that he's just useless and lives beyond his means. He's a gambler, and it's everything you despise. And by the end of the book, you still think, oh, wow, he's quite an interesting guy. You know? So absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he had no sense of, you know, everything about him was about gambling. Everything about him was about taking a chance and living beyond his means. So I think the thing is with any sort of capital punishment, it's okay, but most people don't think they're going to get caught. You know, it's only a deterrent if you actually think at some point you're going to get caught. And I think
he was an idiot twice over then.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, he was constantly an idiot if you go through the historical record. I mean, even when you get to his court case at the end, I mean, oh God, even getting caught. Oh God, I think we'll save that for later. Let's build up some tension to the ending of his tale.
But, yeah, he may or may not get caught. Okay.
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, he was constantly doing stuff that we think, what a wally. But, and I think this is why he became a fascination with the news journals, even at the time he was alive. He kept on slipping away. And I think that's what became more and more, it built up even within his own lifetime. Tens of thousands of people came to see him once he was caught, because it was like they were fascinated with this guy that was slightly, I mean, he was scary. There are scary stories, but also that he just kept on getting away with it. And there's always a little part of all of us that appeals to these criminals.
And I think it was a sort of that period that we're talking about. It was a time when suddenly people thought, well, perhaps there is something else we can do with our lives. Perhaps we don't just have to accept our lot in life. You know, the South Sea bubble had happened. The Civil War had happened, you know, almost 100 years, well, 80 odd years before. I think there was a sense of, I can better myself, which is why I think it resonates so much with today. You know,
better myself. I mean, he's hardly a shining example of an icon for the improvement of the general public.
No.
It was a crook, not a competent crook, and a gambler, and ultimately well, again, spoilers, ultimately a failure. And you can't say, well, he had a great hat, because everyone was wearing the hat in those days.
He probably stole the hat.
Well, you know, so what? I mean, how much like James Mason was he? I mean, I would say possibly the most famous depiction of him is James Mason. So, you know, was that good casting?
No, I mean, when we got to in the end, right? Because when we got to casting, we had to take this historical figure and think about modern parallels of people. We think he was more like Keith Flint from The Prodigy, right? Modern day Essex, you know, punk. And that's really the way we've approached it. And a huge amount of this story is about him being in a gang. He was in a band, if you like. And it was a gang that was living fast and dying young. Not just him. He happened to be, again, because he always escaped, only him and one other person escaped the end of the gang's life. And that's when he became the highway robbery man. So he was kind of like a bunch of young Essex punks. And I'm proud of my Essex roots, and I'm proud of The Prodigy. I thought, well, it's kind of like Keith. I mean, and one thing that really informed us about his character, spoiler, he does die, guys. It was hundreds of years ago. And how he dies is he was hung, famously in York. Hanged, sorry. He was hanged in York. But on the day of his hanging, the way he dealt with it was very rock star. he didn't wait. In those days, they had the cart, and they would then slap the horse's ass, and the horse would go pull the cart, and you'd fall off and be hanged. He didn't wait for the horse. He stage dived off
into the mosh pit.
Into the mosh pit, and we were like, that image was in our heads from day, before we'd written a word. It was like,
do we really know that? Because that sounds like the sort of thing that people would say.
So this is, there are actual, I mean, everything, obviously we've embellished on little bits and had to amalgamate characters and stuff, but there is a lot. This is the other thing that struck us. There is a lot of factual evidence, well, factual as much as you can be, from the papers, from the court record. We've got the entire court record. We've included as much of it as we could in our drama, but so a lot of it is actually definitely 100% factual, and the sort of the descriptions of the hangings of the Gregory gang, the descriptions of the hangings of him, as much as possible anyway, are actually factual. Yeah, it's not just rumor. Stuff that is rumor is stuff like the ride to York on Black Bess, which didn't happen. For those of you who don't know, there's a famous, I think it's from Rookwood actually. He had this horse called Black Bess, which he never had, and he rode to York from London in a day, which he never did. But a lot of the other stuff is actually factual. The other problem is, and we addressed this in our drama as well, because he was a successful highwayman, other people used to pretend to be him. So consequently, there's lots of accounts of Dick Turpin did this, Dick Turpin did that, Dick Turpin was in this place and that place, and everywhere in London virtually and beyond has a Dick Turpin story, which weren't necessarily him.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds a bit like a phenomenon that has many names. Churchillian drift is one. Have you come across that one?
No.
The longer that a quote has been around, the more likely it is to be attributed to Winston Churchill.
Right.
And there are loads of places up and down Britain that are Robin Hood's this, Robin Hood's that, Arthur's this, Arthur's that, Arthur's Hill, Arthur's Seat, Arthur's Creek, because and I think Odysseus is the same. I think an awful lot of the stories in the Odyssey are actually little stories of things that happened to various sailors or travelers, and they all got attributed to Odysseus and put in one book.
It's quite funny growing up around here. Almost every pub you went to as a young man, that's Dick Turpin's corner or cove, or there's a secret passage there. Dick Turpin used to hide. Well, every pub. It's like
he liked his pubs, even those that were built in the 1960s.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So that's a good clue to the why we're remembering him rather than any of the other highwaymen, because you referred earlier, by the way, to the highwayman period. Did you mean the highwayman period within Dick Turpin's life, or did you mean that there was actually a period in history during which highwaymen were a thing and that came to an end because of the invention of the something or other?
So yeah, I mean, that sort of period, and I don't know when the highwayman period, as it were, started, but that sort of period from sort of 1720 to about 1750, 1760 was a period where there were highwaymen. Now, obviously, we're talking about a time before there was a organised police force. For a start, there was parish constables and things like that. So yeah, that's the sort of the 1800s was the highwayman period, and then that was romanticized in the sort of Victorian period, when they were sort of looking back at those sort of dashing.
Okay, but if there is a highwayman period which has a beginning and an end, I'm looking for a reason for that. Why did it come to an end? Did it come to an end with the invention of the railway train? I don't think so. It seems to have come to an end before that. And there were people moving on roads in carts who would have, and every drover in the land, for instance, this would be all around the country every single year. You would drive your huge herd of something or other to market, sell it, and then you had to walk back with a socking great big load of cash on you. The right time of year, the roads would have a lot of drovers on them. I don't know quite what they do. My guess is that a lot of them would gang together, and a lot of drovers would there'd be like 30 of them moving along together. So they're a bit of a more daunting target. But anyway, so can you give us anything why this Highwayman period existed?
I think, you know, when we were doing our research, I think it was, and I don't know this for definite, but I think I don't know when the Bow Street Runners started, but I think they were about 1750 or 1760 or something like that anyway. And I think it was the fact that law was more localized, and everything was very much small, you know, parish constables. If people could afford to have security, if you like, they could do it. But then as things developed, I think, you know, the banks, people had banks rather than having money on them.
Say,
yeah, exactly. And the merchant classes.
So where are you storing the wealth? You know, at the start of this period, that we, you know, one of the things we found fascinating was that clocks were a novelty. Time was a novelty around this period. You know, people didn't have clocks in their houses, and if you did, the working class would be very suspicious of it, because it was a control device. At the end of the day, what is time? It's a way for someone that has a watch or a clock to tell you when they expect you to come and work in the fields, etc. So houses became more of a store of the wealth. So why would you risk it on the roads if there's so much more wealth stored under people's beds? And like Darren says, banking was then becoming a big part of the British Empire and the wealth of London. I mean, that's the big interesting thing about, another interesting question is why Essex? And that, you know, that's what I'm obviously interested in, sitting up here in Essex, but it's that road, it's the roads to the coast from London, and it's the roads to Cambridge, right? You go, there's a lot of wealth moving along these two main arteries right through Epping Forest in that period. And the wealth of London, like Darren said earlier, is changing its flavour from, I mean, and you're a historian, you can educate me better than this. I feel embarrassed talking about my understanding of this history to you. But the way we looked at it was, okay, it wasn't so much about inborn landed wealth. There was an increasingly growing merchant / middle class in London that was accumulating this wealth. And I think for the people of Essex that were quite near it to see it, these people would come out. They'd have, I live in an area full of fancy houses that were built in that period, big houses. But again, people would come out of London with their wealth up the Cambridge Road, build a lovely house in Hertfordshire, Essex, go back down the road for work, kind of like we do now with trains. And again, all of the smaller folk, if you like, around this area who lived in it, were seeing it and could aspire to it and could take it because there wasn't any police. So once that, you know, once society got more and more organized around that wealth, that wealth generating engine that was the British Empire as it was evolving, you know, organization happened and they were stamped out.
Okay, so I actually went off on a tangent there. So the point I'd started to make before I rushed off on my own tangent was that we can see why he became the guy because of that Churchillian drift, Arthur, Robin Hood, what have you. So the fact that, just going with what you said, the fact that other highwaymen of the period were pretending to be him tells us, okay, so he's the guy we should be making the stories about. You know, a Dick Turpin impersonator. I don't think that in the centuries ahead, there are going to be far more films made about Elvis than about Elvis impersonators.
Yeah.
So Dick Turpin is the one to concentrate on, but he's really not a hero. Now, you've mentioned several times you're writing something, but perhaps we need to explain that to the audience a bit clearer. So you have both together worked on a drama. And it's more about a feasible historical version based on what facts we have of Dick Turpin rather than the dashing version. Yeah,
we wanted to take, you know, the Goodfellas approach. You know, it's what is the CV of this criminal career, and explore the character that way. So we, like Darren says, we got as much historically accurate information as we could, mapped it out, and that gave us the spine of the story beats and how the story was going to develop. And we didn't. I mean, we needed to make up 0 events. Really, it was an editing job of how can we craft this into a lovely 10-part drama. So, apart from doing the usual thing of consolidating a couple of historical figures into one, so you can follow them easier, we made very little up apart from the usual stuff you have to make up, which is nobody writes about the women. So we had to do a lot of inferring from the historical record about his wife, about his mother, and how they would have fit into the story. But about the men, there was quite a lot of reporting in the journals, because before he was the one they were writing about this Gregory gang, sometimes referred to as the Essex gang, and they were really nasty terrors, psychopaths, and he was one of them. So that's what started the newspaper fascination with this gang, and then he became the fascination because he's escaped the capture of the gang and was still on the loose, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you did your research, but then you had to write a script, and the script is largely dialogue. All the actual dialogue is invention, I imagine.
Until you get to the court trial.
Okay, so near enough. Yeah, fair enough. Near enough all the but so you've written a story which could be true based on the evidence. And the dialogue, I imagine you use modern grammar.
Well, actually, we looked up. Yes, we looked up the sort of thieves' dialogue of the time, the cant, and we actually used a lot of that. And we've used it in a way that hopefully it's understandable as well. Obviously, you can't overdo it. So it is modern dialogue, yes, but we have used a lot of thieves' slang from the time. And there is actually also the odd bit of reported dialogue as well. Stuff like he meets another highwayman called Tom King, and he holds him up because he doesn't realize who he is. And Tom King says, "What, dog eat dog?" And we've included, and there's records of all those conversations, as real as they can be, but they're in newspapers and things like this, you know, so obviously they probably were embellished even at the time.
I've read modern newspapers and they're not to be trusted.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so it's a radio drama, and split into how long is it when all added together?
It's an audio drama, so it's with Big Finish, who make all the Doctor Who audio dramas, and it's released in 2 volumes, and it's 5 episodes per volume. And volume 1 has come out this summer, and volume 2 is coming out in November.
And the episodes are half hour, so it's 5 hours of drama.
So your primary purpose then is to entertain rather than inform. Is that fair?
No, well, I don't know about Matt.
No, I think it's the same thing to us. I mean, we find, I mean, it was such an entertaining history to read. It's more about sharing your enthusiasm. We were finding out things we'd never heard and just couldn't believe were true, but they were in the, it was like, wow, this is, once you worked out the structure, honestly, it was probably the easiest thing I've written. And I don't know about you, Darren, because it wrote itself. Because you're like, right, this is the episode where this, and this are going to happen. Well, I can't wait to get into these scenes and imagine how it happens. So it's really sharing your enthusiasm for what you've found in the historical research you've done. So it's educational, but it's very entertaining.
I mean, the idea originally that we had was to write a film, hour and a half, 2 hours possibly, a film feature. And there was just so much information there, the actual factual information, that we thought this can't possibly be a film. We'll do it as a TV series. And then, of course, a TV series costs an absolute fortune. And we're both relatively unknowns. So we had the opportunity to work with Big Finish and make it as an audio drama. And the advantage of that was that we could have a lot of characters. I mean, we've got 104 characters over 10 episodes. We could, because the problem with Turpin as a dramatic character is he doesn't stay in one place. So he's constantly moving to new places and meeting new people and getting involved with new groups of people all the time, which for drama is a nightmare.
Yes, just how many locations you'd have to scout.
Yeah, exactly.
And casting.
Yeah, and trying to get rid of all the television aerials. Yeah. So, okay, so did you? When I wrote my script about Hannibal, I don't know if you are aware of this, but I wrote the script for a graphic novel, which all going well is coming out in this year.
Excellent.
Hannibal is sort of cool. And people who are into ancient wargaming, ancient history, they look upon Hannibal as, he's really cool. And I thought there is a danger that I just make him so cool that people think he's the good guy, even though he's really pretty questionable as a good guy, really. And if you want to carry an audience along with your drama, you want people to care about your central character, So you have to make him sympathetic to some degree, and likable in
Very.
some way, possibly.
Yeah.
And so then you're in a danger. You think, oh my goodness, we're writing a script that's aggrandizing a murderous crook.
Yes.
Correct. And that's, but then again, going back to inspiration from the television things that we love, Tony Soprano is lovable for the first 3 episodes of the first series of Sopranos. And then you get, I believe it's the episode, he takes his daughter to look at colleges and he sees someone that's escaped into citizen protection. And by the end of that episode, he's smashing a guy's head in. And that's the first shocking bit of violence in the series by Tony. And it really, and I rewatched The Sopranos recently. And when you get to that episode, you're like, oh my God, this is, and it's because you've fallen in love with him that it is so shocking. But I think that is part of these guys, right? Again, Darren mentioned the craze earlier. There's a, you know, crooks can be quite very charming and you know, charismatic, but then it's really impactful when you have a moment of violence and crime. And we had that in mind. So, you know, our Dick Turpin is charming, and he's played by a very charming young actor called Donald Finn, brilliantly. But when you do get to those odd moments, and it's quite charming the first few episodes because he's poaching. It's like, oh, nothing bad happening. But then when you start getting to the violent house robberies that they started with, and he starts tying people up and semi-torturing them, which again historically he did do, then as an audience you're like, oh, it has that really visceral moment where you go, I've been charmed by this guy, but he's a wrong 'un. And that gives you that sense of distance that you try to keep from the character. But then he'll charm you again, because that's what they do, right?
Yeah. And I think also we wanted to show the relationship between him and his wife. It was very important to us to show, not least because there's hardly any female characters, you know, in the historical records anyway, but it was, we didn't want to make her a gangster's moll, you know. And I think as you're writing stuff, as you well know, as you're writing stuff, you sort of discover things about the characters you're writing as you go. And I think what we found was he for us anyway, he was the character we created, wasn't quite sure where the truth was in the end. You know, he's constantly lying to every single person he meets because that's his personality, you know. So he's constantly his wife is constantly saying to her, as soon as I've got enough money, we can set ourselves up with a proper business and we can, you know, basically go straight. And then she realizes that, you know, by episode 9, this isn't going to happen. You know, but I think he and her both genuinely believe that there's an end to this. There's a reason I'm doing this, in the same way that Walter White in Breaking Bad, there's a reason he's doing it, and once he's done that, but then he gets addicted to that lifestyle, you know.
Yes, Walter White, from Breaking Bad, the respectable chemistry teacher who is given this excuse to turn to crime, which is that he has to put together a load of money because he thinks he's going to die soon from cancer.
Yeah.
And then he just gets so in love with being a crime lord, and so addicted to the power that it brings him, that he wants to be both the respectable family man and the feared crime lord, and these pull in somewhat opposite directions. So do we have some dramatic polls for Dick Turpin pulling in?
Yes, absolutely.
Directions.
Yeah, and there is that thing of the family man again, you know, the promises to the wife, he's going to get himself sorted out, he's going to, once he's got the right amount of money. And there's a moment in it where, you know, his partner in crime is like, you are never going to do this, you are never going to have enough money, as far as you're concerned, you're just never going to.
Well, not if you're a gambler.
Exactly. Yeah.
So does he have a redemption arc, even if it's an unfulfilled one?
No. No. I mean, he ends up after the highway robbery period, he escapes again, heads up north, and then there's clear records of him coming between the north and Hempstead, where he's from, in Essex. And then what he seems to do is turn into a horse thief. So as he goes up and down the road from Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, to Essex, that loop, he'll steal on the way down. He seems to leave them with his parents' pub, And on the way back up, he'll steal another horse, then try and sell it in York. So both routes, he's stealing horses along the way. And he does that for another year or so.
Yeah. And I think that the sort of sympathy, for me anyway, is almost the fact that he loses everything. You know, he gets to a point where he hasn't got any you know, he literally gets to a point where he's arrested and all he needs is a character reference, and he cannot get a character reference because no one really knows who he is, you know.
I mean, why should I sympathize with someone who loses everything, and everything he had was stolen in the first place?
Exactly.
It was just a bit weird, a bit wasn't it?
Well, but you know, would you have this played in schools to improve the good characters of the next generation of children in this country?
No, I think that. Yeah, sorry, Matt, go on.
But he ultimately he doesn't get away with it, right? He pays the ultimate price. So there's no redemption for him. I mean, his redemption came from other people.
5 hours, though.
His redemption comes after his life, really. In, like Darren said, the way he was then mythologized and romanticized, they redeemed him without him earning it by writing all these parlor plays and then fictional books and then Disney movies and then ITV dramas, you know, all the way through those hundreds of years. His reputation somehow got redeemed by other people.
Well, a lot of people like pirates these days. They throw pirate-themed parties, and they go to Pirates of the Caribbean, and pirates are fun, right? You say yar, you talk like this, yar, and you talk like a pirate day, which I think is the 19th of September. And pirates are fun now because pirates are safe now because pirates of the Caribbean wearing the tricorns are not a threat to us. But back in the day, pirates were horrendous and they killed large numbers of people. And if you were robbed by a pirate, it would probably be at the muzzle of a blunderbuss, which would have been a terrifying experience. And they stole and they damaged the economy, and they were, you know, all around bad uns. So is it just that Dick Turpin is now far enough in the past that he's safe?
I think to an extent that's true. I think to an extent that is true. However, I think we wanted to constantly be, because we found it ourselves, at a point where we think, oh, actually he's all right. And then he does something even worse. You know, it's that whole thing of actually he's not really all right, you know, and I think we were quite aware of that. And I think that's why at the end of it, you know, his in our version, his wife does just go, you know what, I've had enough of this. You know, there isn't this sort of moment of her going, oh, I love you, whatever you've done, you know, or anything like that. And I think that's quite important.
And his crimes did escalate, right? So starts off poaching, then it was robbing houses, then it's robbing houses with torture, because you torture the person in the house to find out where they'd hidden the money. When that period's ending, he's then out on the highway with a gun, like you said, with a blunderbuss, holding people up. Some people get shot. He doesn't murder members of the public, but he does end up killing 2 people, one of which by accident because he's a clumsy sod. The other one he did murder on purpose. Then he's on the run again. In that gang period, the gang, there was a sexual assault, which he was associated with those, not by him, but the gang certainly were associated with a sexual assault. So, you know, you can follow the character and enjoy his company, and then one of those incidents will happen, and you'll go, oh, you know, it's that little moment, like you'd have your Breaking Bad. You'd want Walter to do well as a drug kingpin until he melted someone with acid in a bath, and then you're like, oh God, Walter's gone too far, and you'd feel bad for being on Walter's side.
The bath happens really early on.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? It's that feeling of, oh, okay. It reminds you not to be charmed by criminals, and I think that's why these modern dramas have been successful. And you know, and that's very much in the historical record. You can see it. He was a charmer. The press liked writing about him. Then he did just do something bad. He'd shoot someone dead.
So who's the modern equivalent of the Dick Turpin? Who will in 100, 200 years' time, who is alive today, be romanticized when he's safely in the past, but we today think just a wrong un?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know if, yeah, I'm not sure about now. I mean, maybe Elon Musk.
No, he's such a wrong one.
But as I say, you can definitely certainly draw parallels with him and the Krays, for example. Obviously, if you're around the Krays and you're on the right side of them, that's fine. But nowadays, the Krays are very much romanticized, whereas then.
No, but even at the time, I mean, these guys were going around with guns, killing people in the East End, and there were lots of celebrities, film stars, and the like, who were happy to be photographed with them. Yeah,
and that was the same with Turpin. When he was in jail, there were famous people going to visit him, painting him, taking him gifts. Because in those days you could have visitors and people could pay to come and see you and visit you and stuff like that.
Okay, so the romanticization is not all much later. Some of it is contemporary.
Yes, very much.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, the other thing which we haven't mentioned at the time is that the interesting thing about him in some ways was when he joined the Gregory gang, there was already a £50 reward on his head. By the time he'd finished being a highwayman, there was a reward of £200 on his head, and this is in 1730s.
Yikes.
So again, this was another thing of like, this mysterious man who's on the run with a £200 price on his head that anyone could get.
But you said earlier that there was no national police force, there was only a local police force.
Yeah.
So who put up the £200?
That was the king. It was a royal decree.
So it was at national level then?
Yeah.
Royal proclamation.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that, again, for those of you who are not familiar with Dick Turpin, gets across perhaps just how notorious and how big he became. That would have been a very rare thing for a national reward.
Yes.
Yeah.
And have you calculated what £200 would get you back then? Presumably that would get you a huge house.
It's hundreds of thousands of pounds in today's money.
Yeah.
Hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a sheep was like 15 shillings. If you can work it out in sheep.
I'm not sure that my listeners or watchers of this channel are really going to be able to picture wealth in terms of 17th century sheep. Sorry, 18th century sheep. But lots of sheep.
Lots of sheep.
Even a cow.
More than you could count before you fell asleep.
Yeah, absolutely. People wanted to catch him. People wanted to go out and find him because it would change their lives.
Right. So there was a national manhunt. And how long did that last? Presumably the 200 was only quite late in the day that materialized.
So the main highwayman period was with a character called Tom King, who's sometimes called Matt King, but Matt King was his brother. So Tom King was the gentleman highwayman. He was the archetypal gentleman highwayman. He used to give people sixpence after he'd robbed them so they could get a coach home. Oh,
so he was James Mason.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah. And he taught Turpin a lot, and they were together for about 2 years or so. And then, spoiler, Turpin actually shoots King, whether it's on purpose or by accident is debatable, and escapes again. This is when the £200 reward is put on his head. So it's it's after the Gregory gang. He's one of 2 members of the Gregory gang that survived. His friend Thomas Rowden then abandoned him, and he was caught for false coining. And then Turpin was on his own, and then he met Tom King, and then that's the period that that a lot of people think of as the Dick Turpin period of this dashing highwayman. It's sort of a mixture of those 2 characters, really, him and Tom King.
Right. So so Tom King's exploits get folded into the Dick Turpin legend.
Yeah.
The famous ride to York, which was actually from a story about somebody else.
Yes.
That gets folded into the Dick Turpin legend. So it's just like Odysseus and Arthur and Robin and Churchill. They're sort of sucking in legends around them.
Yeah.
And becoming artificially great as a result. So do you see it as part of your role to make him bigger by putting him as the main figure of a 5-hour show, or to show him as someone actually smaller and by correctly attributing these various feats to other people?
That's a really interesting question. I think by telling the true story, I mean, that's really going to be in the eye of the beholder, because there's so much we discovered that people don't know, and the things they don't know tend to be the more criminal side of it. They think they know the Dick Turpin story, but actually, once you start listening to it, you realise all these other crimes he was committing. So in a way, it reduces him in your heroically. Maybe it increases your understanding of him and your knowledge of him, but it definitely reduces your. I would have hoped and thought if people did look at him as a hero, I don't think they're going to get to the end of our 5-hour series and think this guy was a hero. They're going to think he was an interesting, complicated, but ultimately a bit of a doofus.
Right, interesting, complicated doofus. All right, but
yeah,
you tempted me into accepting your invitation to this interview by saying that you had found out some new and exciting stuff. So, what in your researches have you discovered about Dick Turpin that the public has never been privy to hitherto?
Well, I think everything's there and available if people want to find out about it. They can. But I think for us, the interesting thing was that he started off. He didn't suddenly decide he was going to be a famous highwayman. He started off as an apprentice who got himself into debt, and then to try and get out of debt, he started these butcher shops and started rustling sheep and all this sort of stuff, and it just escalated and escalated and escalated, and he got more and more daring in some senses, and then sort of couldn't really care less, and I think what the things that we found out that were interesting were things like the notorious, and I know there are books about the Gregory gang, but the notorious Gregory gang and how terrifying they really were at that time. Just how also there was this sense of, as we said earlier, this sense of I can better myself. I can go and steal this and I'll be better off. Whereas before that, it was like you just accepted your lot in life. There wasn't any sort of change, if you like. And as Matt's often said as well, the Civil War wasn't. It was within living memory.
Yeah, their parents would remember it, right?
Yeah. So I think that whole period, and for me anyway, as well, the sort of 1700s, the early 1700s, is a really interesting period. You've got the coffee houses starting, you've got the South Sea bubble, as I say, you've got the Bank of England starting to cope with the debt from the South Sea bubble. It's the start of monetarism. It's the start of our modern lifestyle, really, and I think he's part of that, and I think that's what we wanted to show.
For me, the
rise of the sorry,
it's the I'm going to spoil the ending. The end, the sequence of the ending is the most startling thing that people don't know. So, as I mentioned earlier, he's now a horse thief, but in Yorkshire he presents as a gentleman. He's been, the charming guy with nice clothes. In Yorkshire, they think he's a gentleman, so he's taken out on shoots and all with all hoi polloi. Anyway, he goes on a very jolly middle class shoot, gets drunk, and on his way back, he hasn't shot anything all day. He's obviously too drunk, and it's a running joke for our series. He's a terrible shot, but I'm sure you know more about those weapons in that period than we do. But those weapons,
in the right direction, yeah,
they're not that accurate, right? And he was a terrible shot. So and this is the historical record. He's being ribbed by the people he was shooting with. This actually is in the court case. Some of this, so we know this for facts. And they said, and they bet him one last wager of the day that he can't shoot the cockerel that's outside of the pub where the gentleman Turpin is staying. He goes up and he goes, right, I'll take that bet. And he actually shoots the cockerel. He actually gets a shot on target. Of course, this goes down badly with his landlord. So now he's basically shot a chicken and he's arrested. And now he's in jail. Okay, but they don't know he's Dick Turpin. They think he's a man called John Palmer. But unfortunately for him, John Palmer's now built a bad reputation in Lincolnshire for being a horse thief. So now they are beginning to think, I can't remember, Darren, is he got a stolen horse with him as he's arrested? Is that how they spot the missing horse?
Recently stole 2 horses, yeah.
So Lincolnshire get involved, because that's not far, it's just down the road, right? There's not so many roads back then. The roads are, good communication channels. And now he's moved, now he's arrested for horse theft, much worse than shooting a chicken. And now it's getting serious. Now it's really bad, right? Horses are worth a fortune. It's like stealing a Porsche. So now this is where he needs the character reference, which Darren referred to earlier, which you very unsympathetically laughed at that no one would give him. So obviously nobody will give him a character reference as John Palmer in Lincolnshire, because they know what he's done up there in a minute. So he writes back to Essex, to his home pub where he's from, as John Palmer, and asks for a character reference. I think hoping that his brother-in-law or his father would get this message and write a fake character witness for. Anyway, they're not in, because guess what? His dad was in jail for receiving a stolen horse from Dick Turpin. So his dad can't receive. So tell me when you want me to stop, Nicholas, because this goes on. So this is the best bit.
Okay.
So
I'm not stop you now, then, am I?
Nobody in the pub can. In those days, the receiver paid for the postage, not the sender.
Yeah, it's before the penny black. Yeah.
Nobody will pay for it. Goes back to the post office, Saffron Walden, and there just happens to be a man in Saffron Walden who recognises the handwriting because he taught a young Richard Turpin how to write.
So he didn't disguise his handwriting. What I believe the term you used was doofus.
Yes.
But even writing to the pub was a bit stupid. Just like the whole thing. Like, wow, he shot a chicken. Now he's getting done for a horse. Writes a letter. No one pays for it. And they bust his identity because nobody would pay for the letter.
Yes, you hope they won't work out that you are Dick Turpin. So you write to a character reference to Dick Turpin's dad, who's in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't a great plan, was it?
It's not the best of plans. But yeah, I mean, we're full of facts like that in this drama that we just couldn't believe as we were reading them.
Yeah.
And we've tried really hard not to make a comedy, but at times you just are laughing at him.
Yeah, it is difficult. There are, I much to the surprise of, I think my artist, I put surprising quite a lot of jokes in the Hannibal graphic novel.
It's part of life, isn't it? And humor is a part of life, but bloody hell, what a series of unfortunate events to then be found out to be Dick Turpin.
Yeah.
But again, you see, if it sort of lets him off the hook, if the audience finds him funny, then they can find him hapless in his incompetent criminality, and then they can have sympathy for him again and end up liking him again, despite the fact that the thing that he was doing incompetently was criminal activity.
Yes, yeah. And that is a fact. I mean, I think, as I say, when you read the Immortal Turpin book, you really start off thinking, oh my goodness, this guy is awful. But still, by the end of it, you're like, wow, I've been on a real journey here, I mean,
especially you get to the court, when you read the actual court transcript, he's clearly pissed. He's in court drunk. Because he doesn't expect that.
It's English slang drunk, not American slang angry.
Yes.
That where he gets a bit angry. But he's clearly tipsy in court because he does not think that is going to be his final court appearance. He thinks and says so, and it's in the court record, that he's going to be moved back to Essex to be tried as Dick Turpin. But they never do. They finish the job up there in York. Well,
if he's gained fame, then one way to gain fame is to be the guy who hanged or sentenced to hanging the famous Dick Turpin. So why at the time, was there a debate at the time in the fledgling newspapers of the period, or pamphlets, as perhaps some of them were then, as to the morality of the people who were aggrandizing him? And, so for instance, a famous person goes to visit him in a prison, and then perhaps gets a keepsake. And were people not debating at the time, hang on, should we be doing this? Because is this not aggrandizing and even celebrating somehow a career criminal?
I think at the time, going to hanging was a sport. So I think once he was caught, it was okay. It was more about curiosity and about the spectacle of the whole thing. It becomes like it's the justice system has done its thing, and therefore I think you are forgiven for wanting a bit of that keepsake.
All right. So is there no evidence for contemporary romanticization before he was caught, when he was at large. There is
it was. But I think the other thing as well, he threatened violence, but he was not very violent with the public. In fact, the opposite. You know, these guys, there's a famous story of Tom King and Turpin robbing someone, and then the person complaining that they'd had no money to get home, and they gave them 2 tuppence back, so they've got money for the omnibus or whatever.
But he did point loaded guns at people.
He did threaten violence, but didn't commit that many on the public. So the 2 people that are murdered are not members of the public, for example. One's a law enforcement officer, well, a gamekeeper, and one's his own best friend. The assault, it's not clear he was there when it happened. He definitely did threaten and torture people in their homes to get money out of them, but he wasn't famous for that bit. He was famous for being on the road and being relatively polite about it.
And also
he didn't feel, he's not, you know, he wasn't like he was you know, the Yorkshire Ripper or Jack the Ripper. He wasn't going around murdering dozens and dozens of members of the public, you know. He was threatening them. And then maybe in those days they're a bit tougher than we are now. It's like, oh, well, that's fine to threaten people.
Well, I think also the murder is after. So he's with Tom King. Tom King dies, shot by Turpin. And the murder is when someone tries to apprehend him and he's on the run after everything. So it's after the Gregory gang, after he's been with a highwayman, after he's been famous. You know, that's when the murder happens. So I think, although it's unforgivable, I think that was a real turning point for people. And that's when he sort of disappeared. You know, he hadn't actually officially, I mean, he may well have murdered people, I guess, but he hadn't officially murdered anyone until that point.
Perhaps that's part of the modern appeal of Dick Turpin, is that if Tony Blair gets his way and we all have to have digital ID, the idea that you could just go to the next town and say your name was something else and start again, to do a Reggie Perrin, for instance, will be known to the British audiences, and the rest of you will just have to look him up. I can remember as I was growing up, I was comforted by the thought that starting again was an option. And as I get older, it's less and less of an option. And perhaps even back then, people quite liked the idea, oh, I'm in this town where everybody knows me, and I went to school with everyone, so they all remember how bad I was at this topic, and I can never, you know, that day that the embarrassing thing happened at school, I'm in this town amongst people who all remember me for that one embarrassing incident. And of course, no one gets through childhood without something embarrassing happening. And so everyone, you know, knows, you know, just the idea of, I could just go to somewhere else and just start again and call myself something else and pretend to be a gentleman. I could learn off James Mason how to do it and then pass myself off. And that is perhaps part of his appeal. Do you think the starting again,
Yeah, and I think as we've said, you know, I think the other thing is, as you quite rightly say, in those days, people were very localized. They stayed very local, whereas Turpin didn't. You know, he went from, you know, it got too hot in Essex. You know, so they came down to southeast London. They went to Charlton. They robbed a house there. They went over to Roehampton. You know, as a highwayman and as a housebreaker, they were all around London. They were in Kent. They were in, you know, Middlesex. So again, it's like this notoriety of being omnipresent, as well as which not many people were, you know.
Yeah, so tell me about this traveling thing, the Black Bess and the ride to York. Well, maybe not tell me because I sort of know about it, but tell the viewers and listeners about the famous ride that he almost certainly didn't do.
So there was a highwayman before Turpin called Swift Nick Neverson, and he robbed someone.
Sorry, say that name again.
Swift Nick Neverson.
Swift Nick Neverson. Oh,
that's gonna be Nick's new online handle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
On Reddit.
So he robbed someone in I think it was in Gravesend, and he didn't do it on one horse, but he rode from Gravesend to York and went to the mayor and asked, who was playing bowls, and asked the mayor what time it was, and the mayor told him what the time was. And the reason he didn't get charged for the murder and the robbery was because it was felt impossible to have got to York by that time in that period. Now, obviously, clocks weren't centralized then either. So actually, the clock in York was a different time to the clock that would have been in southeast of England. But you know, essentially, it was that's where that story comes from. You know, so it was done. It wasn't necessarily done on one horse, and it certainly wasn't done by Dick Turpin.
So there's an example of Churchillian drift.
Yes, absolutely.
Dick Turpin drift.
Yes.
So he's a man who seems to have lived on the coattails of others. So his amazing feat of horsemanship was somebody else, and his gentlemanly highwayman-ness was actually somebody else.
Yeah.
So you know, the main thing that I'm taking away from this is that the guy was an idiot and a crook from a young age. Could you reframe the entire story as a fable against the evils of gambling and say, were it not for gambling, this man could possibly have led a good and honest and useful life?
Well, I think it's difficult to judge now. We have a lot of entertainment options, right? But for young men, you know, apprenticing in Whitechapel in that era, you know, dicing in the pubs was you know, that's what they do in the evening, right? So you know, it's difficult for us to judge now from where we sit with our streaming services and our wonderful YouTube channels and historians teaching us things. How do you expect them to occupy themselves when they're relaxing? So I think it's more in his nature that he, you know, it's the fact that he was a risk taker. But you know, risk takers fascinating, aren't they? And where would we be without them? I guess so.
And I think he wasn't alone. You know, I think gambling was a massive thing at the time. You know, I mean, a pint of gin for breakfast and gambling, you know, wasn't unusual, was it?
That was just you yesterday, wasn't it, Darren?
Exactly. Yes.
Oh, there
normal Tuesdays.
Noble houses that came crashing down because the son of the chap who'd amassed all the wealth then inherits it and gambles it away in astonishingly quick times on occasion. So all right, so he was a risk taker by nature, but of course there must have been, I suppose, if you move around a lot, there aren't people who know that you're a chronic gambler. So maybe gamblers should stay in one place so that people around them and at least have the chance to say, I think you've bet enough, mate, actually.
Yes, yeah.
Although gambling is an increasing problem today because now people can do it slyly on their own in the middle of the night and bet on some website that's actually hosted in Singapore or somewhere. And I do wonder about the evils of gambling and how we're going to make it clear to the next generation that gambling is a really bad idea. No, so Dick Turpin is, you know, possibly one springboard for telling the kids don't gamble.
Then you end up here.
No, I think he's a bad example of that because they're just gonna listen to this story and go, this guy was cool. He had a horse and a gun. He went around with a nice hat. They're not going to take away the lesson you want, Nick.
Well, so have you failed then? Have you written the story about the guy who was a wrong one and it made him seem cool after all?
Well, what I think we've written, what's fascinating, right, is why, like you said at the start, why is his name carried on? Why is it echoed? And really, it's about celebrity. That's what it's about. Right? He was celebrated within his lifetime. And then romanticized and cleaned up for a couple of hundred years after his lifetime. And that's what's fascinating with the modern parallel is, you know, is looking at people that are celebrated that perhaps we shouldn't have celebrated. And one great example of that is the story of the owl. You ready, Darren? You love the owl. Look at his little face. So one of the things we found, which we had to put in, I'm afraid, was there was a story, and this was in the paper in one of the country journals, of a pub in Epping that advertised that they had captured the terror of Epping Forest. They weren't clear in their small print what they meant by that. So people all over the area assumed that they'd captured Dick Turpin. And they go to the pub and they were charging people to go into the back room to see the terror of Epping Forest. And literally there were crowds outside and The dragoons had to get involved to control the drunk people fighting. Anyway, it was an owl. They captured an owl, but because of the celebrity,
You were a vole. That would be the terror of Epping Forest to you.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And he'd been hassling livestock apparently.
And the ducks from the duck pond and stuff.
They deliberately misadvertised that around the region quickly. Word spread that they'd caught Dick Turpin, and when the law enforcement got there, it was just a lot of people queuing up to pay to see an owl. But the fact is, he was so celebrated.
I think it's a great story. Put it in.
Yeah,
it's gone in. But it's indicative of that his name had spread over mouth to mouth, pub to pub, journal to journal, in the newspapers. His name was spread very deeply into this area at the time. It was very high in the national consciousness.
and I think also it shows that everyone at that time was trying some sort of scam, trying some sort of thing. They were trying desperately to get more money or whatever.
No. Two wrongs don't make a right. Okay, you can't say, oh, you can let me off for pointing a blunderbuss into someone's face and torturing his auntie because a pub captured an owl and misadvertised it.
Yeah, it's all a bit weird, a bit way around here.
Yeah. So what do people do then?
We are the cheeky chappies.
What do people do then if they want to hear your drama?
So at the moment, it's been released on Big Finish, which is a website for audio drama. And they can look it up on there, and they can buy the first 5 episodes. And then the next 5 episodes, as Matt said, will be out later in the year. You download them as they have an app, or you can download them and listen to them as MP3s, I think.
And then it'll be on Audible and Spotify sometime in October for people that are already subscribed to those.
Grand. Okay. Thanks. So is there anything that you want to add about Dick Turpin before we wrap this up?
I'd like to add one point. So going to the £200 from earlier, here's a callback for you because I looked it up while you two were talking. What would £200 get you in modern, in those days, right? £200 would have got you 37 horses, 48 cows, and it was the equivalent of 2,200 days at work for a skilled tradesman. So the £200 reward was 2,000 days' wages.
Yikes.
Yeah.
So it was a decent prize. I mean, I'd do it for the 48 cows.
How many sheep was it, Matt?
I'm glad you asked. It was 333 stones of wool.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
I can't tell you about sheep. That's all I've got on my stats.
Did you say stoves of wool?
Stones. I think they're called
stones, as in the weight.
Weight, probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
333 stones of wool.
Wow.
You could get a hell of a cloak out of that.
Yeah. You can make loads of hats.
Scarf. Lovely scarf.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sharing this fascinating tale with us.
Thank you for having us, Nicholas.
And, look forward to the launch of your drama.
Yeah. And we look forward to reading Hannibal.
Please let it be this year. I have good reason. I have good reason to believe that it will be this year. And we've even got a target date later in the year, but I don't want to make any promises.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Righto. Bye-bye.
All right.